Live-action adaptations of video games for the longest have been the bane of many gamers' existence. Reason being is because they used to not be made with TLC. During the 90s and early 2000s, it was obvious the corporate overlords at Hollywood were just there to make a quick buck. It all started with the 1993 Super Mario Bros. Movie, and it was all downhill from there. You had Jake Gyllenhaal as the Prince of Persia, Angelina Jolie as the Tomb Raider, and Magneto in Assassin's Creed. I mean, since those days, things have improved. We've had hits like Detective Pikachu in the Sonic films, but for every one of those movies, you also have Dwayne Johnson in Rampage to remind you that we've still got a long way to go.
Yeah, I know that's right.
The latest live-action adaptation to show the world video games are indeed art is The Last of Us. The Last of Us is an HBO Max exclusive based on the video game franchise of the same name. It stars Hollywood's current It Boy Pedro Pascal as Joel and Bella Ramsey as Ellie. According to HowLongToBeat.com, the original game takes the average gamer about 18 hours to complete if you do the story and some side quests. HBO took an 18-hour game and they condensed it down to 9 episodes, with the average runtime of each episode being 57 minutes. And those numbers were not randomly pulled out of my anal cavity, by the way. I added all the minutes up from the episode and I divided by 9 to get the average runtime because math is cool, kids.
And knowing is half the battle.
G.I. Joe.
It's interesting Naughty Dog and HBO managed to condense such a meaty game down to 9 episodes, seeing as the show takes some liberties with the source material. For the most part, I would say this is the most accurate live-action adaptation of a video game to date, but there's just enough new here to bring in the OG fans. The lack of new content was the one thing I was worried about. The first couple episodes follows the game almost to a T, to the point that I almost caught myself wondering, I was like, should I finish this show? Because I know what happens. But the good news is that by the time you make it to the 3rd episode, the show begins to play with the source material. They don't change the core story, but instead they add more context to what was already there, and to that, I applaud them. One of the biggest changes they made to the show in comparison to the game is episode 7, titled Left Behind. This episode is based on the post-launch DLC titled the same thing. This episode was a highlight to me for a multitude of reasons. The first of which, the storyline provides more insight into the mind frame of Ellie and what loss means to her, but more importantly, I enjoyed this episode because I never played the DLC. If you're familiar with my content, you know I do not like paying for DLC. It's usually overpriced and it's underwhelming, except for Lair of the Shadow Broker, because everybody loves Lair of the Shadow Broker, and if you don't, it's because you think committing treason is a fun hobby.
You lost me on that one.
Jokes aside, this episode was nice because I didn't play the DLC. I didn't care. It was released 7 months after the base game in February 2014, so my interest for this DLC was already gone. I recall watching this episode thinking like, I think this is the DLC. I remember that scene from the trailer. Sweet, I never gotta buy it. So just know, if you choose to watch the show, it is slightly out of order with the game. It's okay though, because it does give more context to the character of Ellie, and it fits in with the rest of the show. And if you've never played the game, this is something you would never even know unless I brought it up. If I had to describe this show, The Last of Us can be best described as amazing. The chemistry between the actors who play Ellie and Joel is on point. Now, admittedly, it took me a couple episodes to get used to Bella because she doesn't look like Ellie in the game, but once I got past that and just accepted her, you start to see that she's a very talented young lady. What impressed me most though about The Last of Us, outside of the writing and the acting, is the CG. It's not overused, and when it's used, it looks believable for the most part. You could tell HBO spent a pretty penny on this show, which is nice to know because I think we were all worried about this show after the Discovery acquisition. I was also happy they didn't water down the show. HBO is the perfect platform for such a gritty IP. I was worried this show was gonna dance around some key moments in the game that touch on more sensitive topics, but that's not the case here. The show doesn't hold back, and it's better for it in my opinion. There's also some Easter eggs in the show for the hardcore fans that I won't spoil, which is just another reason to watch outside of the new story element. Now, you're probably sitting there thinking like, man, he is praising this show a lot, and it's very rare that you hear me praise something so much. So you, the viewer, are probably sitting there like,
Is there anything wrong?
Actually, yes, there's a couple things that I didn't like about the show that I think can be improved on for the next season. The first of which is the lack of clickers or zombies for those of you unfamiliar with the games. All throughout the show, you hear how much everyone fears them, but you barely see them. The show chose to focus on the decay of society and human interactions that there's barely any survival aspects in the show. I think The Last of Us could not only use more clickers, but just action in general. There's an entire episode dedicated to the life of 2 lovers, and I understand why they did it, but it's just like, come on, let's get back to cracking some skulls. The good news about this complaint is that I'm not the only one, and it seems that Neil Druckmann has heard fans, and it sounds like things will be heating up in the next season. I'm just curious to see how they pull pull off that second game, seeing as it did split the fan base. Now, moving on to my second complaint, it's the show's pacing. Towards the end of the show skips like half of the game and it goes straight to the ending. Now, if you didn't play the games, you wouldn't even have known that, but I did, and I thought it was a strange way to skip over so much material. It's like they were just trying to rush to get to that second game that split the community, and that's confusing to me. I would think you would want to milk the game that everybody loves more. But all in all, I have no problem saying The Last of Us is the best live action adaptation of a video game to date. And I think that has to do with the fact that this was easier to adapt, seeing as it was damn near a movie already. But even still, kudos to Naughty Dog and HBO because they still had to execute on their plan. So I tipped my hat to them. Definitely check out the show if you haven't already. And if you've never played the games, don't trip because the show follows the games pretty well. Now, before I end this video, I wanted to address something I saw on Twitter. It was a screenshot of a viral TikTok where this lady claims she saw the show and she loved it, but she now has a bone to pick with gamers. She claims we're gatekeeping video game stories from her. This is one of the worst takes on the internet this week because who is gatekeeping video game stories? Gamers have always tried to get new people to join in on the fun. Hell, gaming is more social than ever. Half of y'all don't even be playing games. Y'all just be sitting in party chatting in Discord trying to talk to one another. For the longest, we've said gaming is art, but the media and non-gamers, aka normies, dismissed it as nerd stuff. A game gets a TV show, and now you're trying to say we kept the games to ourselves. Ma'am, The Last of Us released June 14th, 2013 for the PlayStation 3. It was then remastered for the PS4, and then it was remastered again for the PS5 to launch alongside the show, and they just announced a PC version for March 28th, 2023. If anything, Naughty Dog has been milking the hell out of the original game. You've had 4 chances to play this game over the span of the last 10 years. Nobody has kept anything from you. You just wasn't looking hard enough. But hey, I'm just saying.